The courtroom was cold and gray, just like the faces of the officers who sat behind the long metal table. Danny Marsh stood alone in the center of the room, his hands bound in front of him, his uniform stripped of all its medals and patches. He was 26 years old, and his life was about to end in every way that mattered. The head judge, a woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, read from a digital tablet without looking at him. She spoke of duty. She spoke of loyalty. She spoke of the sacred trust that every soldier owed to the Galactic Covenant. And then she spoke of his crime. Danny had refused to fire. 3 weeks ago, his unit had been ordered to destroy a refugee transport. The ship was carrying 800 people fleeing from a war zone, but intelligence reports claimed that enemy spies were hidden among them. The order was simple. Destroy the ship. Kill everyone. Let the spies die along with the innocent. Danny's finger had been on the trigger. He could still feel the cold metal against his skin when he closed his eyes. 800 people. Men, women, children. Families who had already lost everything, now running for their lives. He could not do it. He had lowered his weapon. He had refused the direct order of his commanding officer. And because of his hesitation, other soldiers had hesitated too. The transport had escaped. The refugees had lived, and now Danny would pay the price. Corporal Danny Marsh, the judge said, finally looking at him with those cold eyes. You are hereby found guilty of insubordination and dereliction of duty. You are stripped of your rank and all honors. You are sentenced to permanent exile on HFY. May you find time to consider your choices in the silence of that world. HFY. Danny had heard of it. Everyone had. It was a frozen planet on the edge of known space, a place where the Covenant sent people it wanted to forget. No one ever came back from HFY. No one ever even tried. They gave him 1 hour to record a message for his family. He sat in a small room with a camera pointed at his face, and he tried to find the right words. Mom, he said, his voice cracking. Dad, Kelly, I know you probably won't understand what I did. Maybe you'll be ashamed of me. But I want you to know that I made a choice, and I stand by it. There were children on that ship. Babies. I couldn't kill them. I just couldn't. He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I love you all. Take care of Buster for me. And Kelly, finish school. Make something of yourself. Don't end up like your stupid brother. He tried to smile, but it came out wrong. He ended the recording and sat in silence until they came for him. The journey to HFY took 6 days. Danny spent most of it alone in a small cell, staring at the gray walls and thinking about the life he was leaving behind. He thought about his mother's garden back on Earth, the way the tomatoes grew so red and ripe in the summer sun. He thought about his father's workshop, the smell of sawdust and machine oil. He thought about Kelly's laugh, loud and bright like bells ringing. He would never see any of them again. When the ship finally arrived at HFY, Danny was escorted to the cargo bay by 2 guards who did not speak to him. They handed him a survival pack and a thermal suit, then opened the outer door. The cold hit him like a physical blow. It was beyond anything he had ever experienced, a cold that seemed to reach inside his body and squeeze his very bones. The world outside was white and gray, nothing but snow and ice and distant mountains that looked like the teeth of some enormous beast. Good luck, one of the guards said. There was no kindness in his voice. It was just something to say. Danny stepped out onto the frozen ground. The door closed behind him. The ship rose into the sky and disappeared into the clouds. And then he was alone. For the first few hours, Danny simply walked. He did not know where he was going. There was nowhere to go. But walking felt better than standing still, better than thinking about everything he had lost. The thermal suit kept him alive, but just barely. The temperature on HFY was far below freezing, and the wind cut through every gap in his clothing like tiny knives. By the time the pale sun began to set, Danny knew he needed to find shelter, or he would die. He found a cave in the side of a rocky cliff, just large enough for him to squeeze inside. The walls were made of black stone that seemed to hold a faint warmth, and Danny pressed himself against them gratefully. He ate a small portion of his rations and drank some water from his supply, knowing he would need to find more soon. That first night was the longest of his life. The wind howled outside like a wounded animal, and strange sounds echoed through the darkness. Danny did not sleep. He just sat there, knees pulled to his chest, waiting for morning. But morning came, and Danny was still alive. Days passed, then weeks. Danny learned to survive on this frozen world through trial and error, through stubbornness and desperation. He discovered that small creatures live beneath the ice, burrowing animals with thick fur and fatty meat. He learned to trap them using wire from his survival kit. He learned which ice was safe to melt for water and which was contaminated with minerals that would make him sick. His thermal suit was failing slowly. The power cells were draining faster than he had hoped, and there was no way to recharge them. Danny knew he had maybe 2 or 3 months before the suit died completely, and then he would freeze to death within hours. But he kept going. He did not know why. There was no rescue coming. There was no hope of escape. But something inside him refused to give up, some stubborn spark that his father had passed down to him. Marsh men don't quit, his dad used to say. We might lose. We might fail. But we don't quit. So Danny did not quit. He explored the cave system, mapping it in his mind, learning its secrets. The caves went deep into the mountain, twisting and turning through the black rock. Some passages led nowhere. Others opened into vast caverns filled with strange crystals that glowed with soft blue light. It was beautiful in its way. Alien and cold and deadly, but beautiful. And then, on the 43rd day of his exile, Danny found something that changed everything. He had gone deeper into the caves than ever before, following his suit's thermal scanner toward a source of heat. Heat meant life on this world. Heat meant survival. What he found was something else entirely. The passage opened into a cavern so large that Danny could not see the ceiling. Blue crystals covered the walls, glowing softly like stars frozen in stone. The light they gave off was gentle and strange, turning everything into shades of blue and silver. But that was not what made Danny stop breathing. In the center of the cavern, resting in a shallow bowl of dark volcanic rock, lay 7 eggs. Each one was bigger than a man's chest, covered in scales that shimmered gold and red even in the blue light. They were beautiful. They were terrifying. They were unlike anything Danny had ever seen. He knew what they were. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Pirathi, the dragons. They were one of the oldest species in the universe, ancient beyond human understanding. They had ruled a quarter of the galaxy long before humans had learned to make fire. They were powerful, proud, and completely uninterested in the affairs of younger races. The Galactic Covenant had tried many times to make contact with them, to form treaties and alliances, but the Pirathi simply ignored them. They had their own worlds, their own concerns. Humans were like insects to them, too small to notice. But everyone knew that the Pirathi were protective of their eggs. Story said that a Pirathi mother would destroy entire planets to protect her young. Story said that the dragons remembered every wrong done to them, and that their revenge could span centuries. Danny looked around the cavern, his heart pounding. If there were eggs here, where was the mother? He found her near the entrance of the cavern, hidden in a shadow he had walked right past. She was massive, easily 40 meters long, her scales the color of copper and fire. Even dead, she was magnificent. Danny approached slowly, carefully. He could see what had killed her now. There were wounds along her side, burns from energy weapons. Parts of her hide had been cut away, the valuable scales harvested like crops from a field. Poachers. Someone had found this dragon, killed her, and stripped her for parts. Dragon scales were worth more than gold on the black market. A single scale could buy a small ship. An entire dragon hide was worth more than most planets, but they had not found the eggs. Maybe they had been interrupted. Maybe they had not known the eggs were here. Whatever the reason, they had taken what they wanted and left. The mother had crawled back to her nest to die. Danny could see the trail she had left, a smear of dark blood across the stone floor. She had dragged herself all this way, wounded and dying, just to be near her children one last time. Danny stood there for a long moment, looking at the eggs, then at the dead mother, then back at the eggs. The thermal scanner on his suit was still beeping. The eggs were warm, heated by some geological process deep beneath the volcanic rock. But they were not warm enough. Without their mother's fire to keep them heated, they would cool slowly. The embryos inside would die. Danny did not know how long that would take. Days, maybe. A week at most. But it would happen. He thought about walking away. The eggs were not his responsibility. He had his own problems, his own survival to worry about. He had maybe 2 months of power left in his thermal suit, and every bit of that power was precious. But he could not stop looking at the eggs. 7 unborn lives, waiting in the darkness for warmth that would never come. Danny thought about the refuge transport. He thought about the 800 people he had saved by refusing to fire. He thought about the children on that ship, the babies in their mother's arms. "You're going to get me killed," he said to the eggs. "You know that, right?" The eggs did not answer. Of course they did not answer. They were eggs. Danny sighed and sat down next to the nest. He put his hand on the nearest egg, feeling the warmth of the shell through his glove. The scales were smooth and hard, like polished metal. "All right," he said. "Let's see what we can do." He spent the next several hours figuring out the problem. His thermal suit could generate heat. That was what it was designed to do. Normally, it kept that heat close to his body, protecting him from the cold. But he could adjust the settings, redirect the heat outward. He could turn himself into a living furnace. The problem was power. His suit's cells were already draining. If he increased the heat output, they would drain even faster. Much faster. Danny ran the numbers in his head. If he used the suit normally, staying warm and conserving power, he might survive another 8 or 9 weeks. If he cranked up the heat to keep the eggs alive, he would have maybe 3 weeks. Perhaps less. 3 weeks, and then the cold would kill him. He looked at the eggs again. In the blue light, they almost seemed to glow from within. He could imagine the tiny dragons curled up inside, waiting to be born. "My dad always said I was too soft," Danny muttered. Guess he was right. He adjusted the settings on his suit. The power indicator dropped sharply, and a warning message flashed across his display. He ignored it. Then Danny Marsh curled his body around 7 dragon eggs and began to give them his warmth. The first day was not so bad. Danny had food in his pack and water to drink. He talked to the eggs because the silence was too heavy, telling them about his life back on Earth. He told them about his parents, about his sister Kelly, about his dog Buster who loved to chase squirrels. "You would like Earth," he said. "It's warm there." "Well, some parts are warm. Other parts are cold, but not like this. Nothing is cold like this." He told them about the ocean, how it stretched from horizon to horizon, blue and green and endless. He told them about forests filled with trees so tall you could not see the tops. He told them about cities made of glass and steel, where millions of people lived and worked and dreamed. "Humans are strange," he admitted. "We do terrible things sometimes. We hurt each other. We hurt other species. We make so many mistakes." He paused, adjusting his position to cover more of the eggs. But we also do good things. We build. We create. We love. We take care of each other, at least when we remember to. And sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, we find a way to keep going. That's the best thing about us, I think. We don't give up. Even when we should. The eggs did not respond. But Danny liked to think they were listening. Days passed. Danny's food ran out. He managed to trap a few of the burrowing creatures from tunnels near the cavern, but he was growing weaker. The cold was seeping into his bones, despite the suit's best efforts. He could feel his body starting to fail, but the eggs stayed warm. That was what mattered. On the 15th day, Danny noticed something new. One of the eggs had developed a tiny crack along its surface. He watched it for hours, afraid to hope, afraid to believe. More cracks appeared. Then another egg began to crack. Then another. They were going to hatch. Danny smiled, even though it hurt to smile. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His fingers were blackened with frostbite. But he smiled anyway. "Come on," he whispered to the eggs. "Come on out. I want to meet you." Danny had stopped counting the days. Time had become something soft and blurry, like looking through frosted glass. He knew he was dying. He could feel it in his bones, in his lungs, in the way his heart seemed to beat slower with each passing hour. But he could not stop now. Not when he was so close. The eggs were cracking. All 7 of them showed lines spreading across their shells like rivers on a map. Something was moving inside them. Something was alive. Danny pressed himself closer to the nest, trying to give the eggs every bit of warmth his failing body could produce. His thermal suit had died 2 days ago. The power cells were empty, the heating systems cold and useless. Now the only warmth came from Danny himself, from the last reserves of heat in his blood and flesh. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough, but it was all he had. He talked to the eggs constantly now. His voice was weak and rough, barely more than a whisper, but he kept talking because silence felt like giving up. "My mom used to sing to me when I was little," he said. "When I was sick or scared, she would sit by my bed and sing. I wish I could sing for you, but I never learned how. My voice sounds like broken machinery." He coughed, and the cough turned into a fit that left him gasping for air. The cold had gotten into his lungs. He could feel it sitting there, heavy and wet. "I'm sorry," he continued when he could breathe again. "I'm sorry I'm not better at this. I'm sorry I can't do more. But I'm here. That has to count for something, right?" Outside the cavern, a storm was raging. Danny could hear the wind screaming through the tunnels, a sound like all the ghosts of this frozen world crying out at once. Snow was piling up at the entrance, slowly sealing them in. That was probably good. It would keep the worst of the cold out. It would give the eggs a better chance. Danny thought about his family. He wondered if they had gotten his message. He wondered if they understood why he had done what he did, both then and now. Probably not. How could they? He barely understood it himself. He thought about his father, Pete Marsh, who had served in the military for 30 years before retiring. His father was a hard man, stern and demanding, but he had taught Danny everything he knew about survival, about duty, about what it meant to be a man. "A man protects those who cannot protect themselves," his father used to say. That's the job. That's the whole job. Danny had tried to live by those words. He had tried to be the kind of man his father would be proud of. And now here he was, dying on an alien world, curled around a nest of dragon eggs, and he did not regret a single moment of it. "I think you would understand, Dad," he whispered. "I think you would have done the same thing." The cracks in the eggs were growing wider. Danny could see movement through the gaps now, flashes of scales and claws. The dragons inside were fighting to get out, struggling against the shells that had protected them for so long. "That's it," Danny encouraged them. Keep pushing. You're almost there. His vision was starting to blur. The edges of everything had gone soft and gray, like the world was slowly fading away. He knew what that meant. He had seen men die before, in battles and accidents and hospitals. He knew the signs, but not yet. He could not die yet. Not until he knew the eggs would be okay. Danny focused on breathing. In and out. In and out. Every breath was a battle, but he kept fighting. He had to keep fighting. He thought about Kelly, his little sister. She had been only 10 years old when he enlisted, a skinny kid with messy hair and a gap-toothed smile. She had cried when he left, holding onto his leg and begging him not to go. He had promised her he would come back. He had promised her everything would be okay. He had broken that promise. He would never see her again. Never watch her graduate from school. Never meet the person she would marry. Never hold her children in his arms. Tears froze on Danny's cheeks before they could fall. I'm sorry, Kelly, he said. I'm so sorry. But even as he said it, he knew that he would make the same choice again. Because those eggs needed him. Because those unborn dragons had no one else. Because sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing everything. And Danny Marsh had never been able to turn away from the right thing. The first egg split open, just as the sun was rising outside. Danny could not see the sunrise, buried as he was beneath the mountain, but he felt it somehow. He felt the world getting slightly warmer, slightly brighter. A tiny dragon tumbled out of the shell and onto the volcanic rock. It was beautiful. Its scales were gold and red like its mother's, and its eyes were huge and dark and full of confusion. It looked at Danny and made a small sound, something between a chirp and a growl. Hey there, Danny whispered. Welcome to the world. Another egg cracked open. Then another. Then another. Within an hour, all 7 dragons had hatched. They were small, each one about the size of a house cat, with wings that were too big for their bodies and tails that kept getting tangled up. They stumbled around the nest, bumping into each other, making those strange chirping sounds. And then they found Danny. He was lying very still now. He did not have the strength to move anymore. His eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow and slow. But he was still warm. Warmer than the stone. Warmer than the air. The dragons crawled over to him. They pressed their small bodies against his, seeking the heat that was fading from his flesh. They did not understand what was happening. They did not understand death. But they understood warmth. They understood comfort, and something deep inside them, something ancient and instinctive, understood sacrifice. Danny felt them curling around him, felt their tiny hearts beating against his skin. He smiled. It was a weak smile, barely a movement of his cracked lips, but it was real. Take care of each other, he said. His voice was so quiet now that he could barely hear it himself. Be good. Be kind. Remember that warmth matters. The dragons chirped and pressed closer. Danny closed his eyes. He thought about Earth one last time. About blue skies and green grass and the sound of rain on a tin roof. About his mother's smile and his father's handshake and Kelly's laugh. About all the beautiful, ordinary things that made life worth living. Then Danny Marsh let go. The cold took him gently, like an old friend offering rest after a long journey. He did not feel any pain. He did not feel any fear. He just felt warm, surrounded by 7 small lives that he had saved. And that was enough. That was more than enough. The dragons stayed with him long after his heart stopped beating. They did not understand why he had gone still. They did not understand why his warmth was fading. But they stayed anyway, huddled together around the strange soft creature who had kept them alive. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, 7 orphan dragons mourned in the only way they knew how. They waited for help that might never come. The Pirathi ship arrived 3 days after Danny died. It came through the clouds like a falling star, massive and golden, its hull covered in scales that matched those of its dragon crew. The ship was called the Eternal Flame in the Pirathi language, and it had traveled across half the galaxy in response to an automated distress signal. The signal had come from the dead mother. All Pirathi carried beacons inside their bodies, devices that would activate if they were killed or seriously injured. When the poachers had murdered her, the beacon had begun to broadcast. It had taken weeks for the signal to reach Pirathi space, and weeks more for the Eternal Flame to make the journey. They had expected to find the mother's body. They had expected to find eggs frozen and dead, victims of a crime that would demand justice. What they found instead changed everything. Elder Kira was the first to enter the cavern. She was ancient even by Pirathi standards. Her scales faded to pale gold, her eyes clouded with age, but still sharp with wisdom. She had seen many things in her long life. She had watched civilizations rise and fall. She had mourned the deaths of countless dragons. Nothing had prepared her for this. The mother lay where she had fallen, her beautiful scales torn and bloodied. Kira felt the familiar pain of loss, the anger that always came when a dragon was killed by lesser creatures. But then her eyes moved to the nest, and the pain transformed into something else entirely. 7 hatchlings were huddled together in a pile of scales and wings. They were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive. And curled around them, frozen solid, was a human. Kira moved closer, her claws clicking against the stone floor. The other dragons on her crew hung back, uncertain, confused. Humans were not supposed to be here. Humans were not supposed to matter. But this human clearly did. The hatchlings looked up at Kira with wide eyes. They chirped at her, a sound of distress and confusion. They did not move away from the human's body. They pressed closer to it, as if protecting it. "What is this?" asked one of the younger dragons, a male named Vorn, whose scales were bright red. "Why is there a human with our young?" Kira did not answer right away. She was studying the scene, piecing together what had happened. The thermal suit on the human's body, the remains of food and supplies scattered nearby, the way the hatchlings clung to him even in death. "He kept them warm," she said finally. Her voice was heavy with something that might have been wonder. The mother was killed. The eggs would have frozen. And this human kept them warm. Vorn made a sound of disbelief. Humans cannot generate enough heat to incubate eggs. It is not possible. No, Kira agreed. It is not possible. But he did it anyway. She reached out with her mind, touching the consciousness of the nearest hatchling. It was a technique that older dragons used to communicate with the young, a sharing of thoughts and memories that went beyond words. The hatchling resisted at first, frightened and confused, but then it opened itself to her. Kira saw everything. She saw the human finding the nest. She saw him discover the mother's body. She saw the moment of decision, the moment when he chose to sacrifice his own survival for creatures he had never met. She saw him talking to the eggs in the darkness, telling them stories about a blue and green world called Earth. She saw him growing weaker day by day, his body failing, his life slipping away. She saw him refuse to give up, refuse to stop, even when giving up would have been so easy. She saw him smile. As the eggs began to hatch. She saw him die surrounded by 7 small dragons who did not understand death but understood love. Kira pulled back from the connection. Her eyes were wet. Dragons did not cry, not exactly, but they could weep in their own way. And Kira was weeping now. "What do we do?" Vorn asked. His voice had changed. The disbelief was gone, replaced by something softer. Kira looked at the frozen human for a long moment. He was so small, so fragile. His species lived for barely a century, their bodies weak, their technology primitive compared to the ancient might of the Piracy. They were like children playing in a garden, built by giants. And yet this one child had done something that no Piracy would have expected. He had given everything for creatures not his own. He had shown a warmth that had nothing to do with fire or heat, a warmth that came from somewhere deeper. "We honor him," Kira said. "We remember him forever." The dragons worked carefully to separate the human's body from the hatchlings. It was not easy. The young ones did not want to let go. They chirped and cried and clung to his frozen form until the older dragons had to gently pull them away. Kira examined the human's body more closely. He had been young, she realized. Even by human standards, he had been young. There was a tag on his clothing, a military identification that listed his name and rank. Danny Marsh, Corporal, exiled. So his own kind had sent him here to die. They had thrown him away like garbage, and he had used his last days to save the children of another species. "Bring him to the ship," Kira ordered. "Prepare him for the journey home. He will rest among dragons." The other crew members moved to obey. No one questioned the order. No one argued. They had all seen the memories now. They had all felt what the hatchlings had felt. This human had earned his place among them. The hatchlings were brought aboard the Eternal Flame, where healers examined them and pronounced them healthy. They were confused and frightened, taken from the only home they had known, but they were also curious. They explored the ship with wide eyes and clumsy steps, getting into everything, asking questions in their chirping language, but they always came back to Danny's body. The healers had placed him in a special chamber, preserving him for the journey ahead. And every day, the hatchlings would gather outside that chamber and press their small faces against the viewing window. They were waiting for him to wake up. They did not understand that he never would. Kira watched them with a heavy heart. She had lived for thousands of years. She had lost many friends, many loved ones. But she had never seen grief like this, pure and simple, untempered by understanding. "They will carry him with them forever," said a soft voice beside her. Kira turned to find one of the healers. A female named Luna with scales of deep purple. Luna was young by Piracy standards, barely 500 years old, but she was wise beyond her years. "Yes," Kira agreed. "They will. What will we tell the council?" Kira considered the question. The Piracy High Council was an ancient and conservative body. They had little interest in other species, especially humans. They might not understand why Kira had brought a human's body back to their homeworld. They might not understand why it mattered, but they would understand the hatchlings. They would understand what Danny had done for them. "We will tell them the truth," Kira said. "We will show them the memories. And we will let them decide what kind of people they want to be." Luna nodded slowly. "Do you think they will honor him?" Kira looked back at the hatchlings, still gathered at the window, still waiting for their human to wake up. "They will," she said. "They must. Because if they do not, then we are not worthy of calling ourselves dragons." The Eternal Flame turned away from the frozen world and began its long journey home, carrying 7 young dragons and the body of a man who had given everything for them. Behind them, Keth 4 continued to spin in the darkness, cold and empty and silent, but it was no longer forgotten. 50 years had passed since Danny Marsh died on a frozen world far from home. 50 years since 7 dragon hatchlings had huddled around his body, trying to give back the warmth he had given them. 50 years since the Piracy had brought him home and laid him to rest among their own. In that time, the galaxy had changed. The Galactic Covenant still existed, still governed most of the known species with its laws and treaties and cold efficiency. Humans still served in its military, still explored its borders, still struggled to find their place among older and more powerful civilizations. They were still small, still young, still learning, that they were no longer unknown. Captain Amy Walsh stood at the viewport of her ship, the Starboard Hope, watching the Pyrithy homeworld grow larger in the distance. She was 42 years old, with gray streaks in her brown hair and lines around her eyes from years of squinting at stars. She had served in the Covenant fleet for 2 decades before being chosen for this mission. First contact with the PYR-8. It should have been impossible. The Pyrithy had ignored humanity for centuries, had refused every attempt at communication, had acted as if humans simply did not exist. But 3 months ago, a message had arrived at Covenant headquarters, transmitted through channels that should not have existed. The people of Danny Mosh are welcome among us. No one knew what it meant. No one had heard of Danny Mosh. When they searched the records, they found only a brief entry about a disgraced corporal exiled to Kethfor 50 years ago. Presumed dead. File closed. But the Pyrithy knew him. The Pyrithy remembered him. And they had finally decided to share their memory with the rest of the galaxy. Amy took a deep breath as her ship entered orbit. Below her, the Dragon homeworld spread out like a tapestry of fire and gold, its surface dotted with cities that had stood for millions of years. She could see the great temples rising from the landscape, monuments to dragons who had lived and died before humans had learned to walk upright. Captain Walsh, her communications officer, a young man named Chris, looked up from his console with wide eyes. "We are being hailed. They want us to land at coordinates they are transmitting now." "Tell them we are honored to accept," Amy said. The Starboard Hope descended through the atmosphere, guided by Pyrithy controllers who spoke perfect human standard. Amy wondered how long they had been learning her language, how long they had been preparing for this moment. The landing pad was enormous, size for creatures far larger than humans. Amy and her small crew stepped out onto Golden Stone, and they found themselves surrounded by dragons. They were magnificent. Each one was different, scales ranging from deep red to bright silver to shimmering purple. The smallest was the size of a truck. The largest was bigger than Amy's ship. They watched the humans with ancient eyes, their expressions unreadable. One dragon stepped forward. She was old, her scales faded to pale white, her movements slow and careful. But there was a warmth in her eyes that surprised Amy. "Welcome," the dragon said. Her voice was like thunder and music combined. "I am Aldo Luna. We have waited a long time for this meeting." Amy bowed, hoping it was the right gesture. "We are honored to be here. But I must confess, we do not understand why you have invited us. Our people have tried to contact you for centuries." Luna made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes, your people sent us many messages, many requests for treaties and alliances. We ignored them all. Then why now?" Luna turned and gestured with one massive claw. "Come, we will show you." They walked through streets of gold and crystal, past buildings that seemed to grow from the ground like living things. Pyrithy dragons of all sizes stopped to watch them pass, their eyes curious but not hostile. Amy had the strange feeling that she was walking through a dream. They arrived at a temple larger than any building Amy had ever seen. Its walls were carved with images of dragons in flight, dragons in battle, dragons breathing fire across the stars. But at the entrance, there was a different image. An image that made Amy stop and stare. It was a human. A man, carved in perfect detail, curled protectively around a cluster of dragon eggs. His face was peaceful. His arms were wrapped around the eggs, like he was trying to shield them from all the cold in the universe. "Danny Marsh," Luna said softly. "The human who gave his fire for our young." Amy felt tears prickling at her eyes. She did not fully understand what she was seeing, but she understood enough. She understood sacrifice. She understood love. What happened to him? She asked. Luna led them inside the temple. The walls were covered with more carvings, more images, telling a story that unfolded like a prayer. The exile, the discovery, the vigil, the death, and at the center of the temple, beneath a dome of crystal that let in the light of 3 suns, there was a statue. It was carved from black stone, the same obsidian that had come from the caves of Keth 4. It showed Danny exactly as he had been found, frozen in the act of giving warmth to 7 eggs. Around the statue, 7 fires burned eternally. They had been burning for 50 years and would burn for 50,000 more. He was sent to die by his own people, Luna explained. They threw him away because he would not kill the innocent. And in his dying days, alone and forgotten, he chose to save our children instead of himself. Amy was crying now. She could not help it. He was a hero. He was more than a hero, Luna said. He was proof. Proof of what? Luna turned to face her, and Amy saw something ancient and profound in those clouded eyes. We are old, Captain Walsh. We have seen many species rise and fall. Most of them are selfish, cruel. They take and destroy and care nothing for those who are different from them. We had begun to believe that this was the nature of all younger races, that none of them could ever understand what truly matters. She looked back at the statue of Danny Marsh, and then a human, with no fire of his own, gave everything he had to keep our children warm. Not for reward, not for recognition, simply because they needed warmth and he had warmth to give. Luna's voice grew soft. You ask why we invited you now, after centuries of silence. The answer is simple. Danny Marsh showed us that humans are capable of true warmth, and we have decided that his people deserve to know what he did, what he meant, what he still means. Amy wiped her eyes. His family. Do they know? They will. We have found his sister. She is old now, but she is alive. We will tell her the truth about her brother. We will show her this temple. We will give her the honor that your government denied him. Thank you, Amy whispered. Thank you. Luna inclined her massive head. Thank Danny Marsh. He is the reason we are speaking today. He is the reason your species will be welcome among the stars. He gave his fire for us, and we have never forgotten. She gestured to the 7 eternal flames. The children he saved are grown now. They serve on our High Council. They have taken human names in his honor. They call themselves the Children of Marsh, and they have made sure that every dragon in our civilization knows his story. Amy looked at the flames, at the statue, at the temple built to honor a man who had been thrown away by his own people. He never knew, she said softly. He died thinking he was alone, thinking no one cared. No, Luna said. He did not die alone. He died surrounded by 7 small lives that he had saved. And he knew, in his final moments, that his warmth had mattered. The old dragon placed one claw gently on Amy's shoulder. That is the lesson of Danny Marsh, Captain. Warmth always matters. Kindness always matters. Even when no one is watching. Even when there is no reward. Even when the universe is cold and dark and full of cruelty. She looked at the statue one final time. He had no fire of his own. He gave it anyway. And that is why the dragons will never forget him. That is why we made him a legend. Amy stood in the temple for a long time after Luna left, looking at the face of a man she had never met. A man who had been forgotten by his own people, but remembered by dragons. She made a silent promise to him. She would make sure humanity remembered too, and they did. For as long as humans traveled among the stars, they told the story of Danny Marsh, the banished warrior who died guarding a dragon nest on a frozen world. They built monuments to him on 100 planets. They named ships after him. They taught his story to their children. Because dragons never forget warmth. And neither do humans. Not anymore.